And right now it's still pretty cool, so until it warms up a bit, there's not a whole lot of them are going to be out.
How do bees fit into the overall operation for you here? Because this is kind of a newer thing for you, right?
Yeah, so the bees, they've been a really fun addition into the homestead system here, not only with the goal of making honey in the future, but making more bees. And they fit in nice because they're a little bit different of a bee. They're a small cell bee, so they're not the standard large cell, and they're been extremely healthy, which is great. In this system, we try to find ways to not just have bees, but to do it in a way where you can function stack something else along with it. So in this case, yeah, we can get honey, we can make bees, we can use them as pollinators. It's a source to bring people in to learn about bees, so there's an outreach educational side, which is great. Here in this bee yard, this year we started off with 5 hives, and now we're up to 13. So they're doing really well. What's neat about this system is we've planted edible windbreaks on either side of the hives here. So in front of here we have Nanking cherry and comfrey will grow up, and it'll get 6 to 7 feet tall. And we position this in a location to where when the bees come out and they take their flight path, they're already hitting about this point and at about 10 feet. But what's fun about it is not only can we come eat and harvest medicinals here, but it's creating a little bit of a privacy screen and a visibility screen. So when I'm up here working the back part of these hives, I don't have to worry about being in the flight path of the bees because they're already up and over this system here. And the same thing with the row that's up here. It's elderberry and comfrey, and the deer are finding it, and they're enjoying that. So that's great too. What's also nice, as you can see, is we can have our kids in here working the bees, and the nature of these bees is they're very docile, they're very calm, they're protective of their honey and of their young, but we can be in a bee yard with no gear on and working the bees, which is an important aspect, which is why we run these in 5-frame mediums. We're reducing the weight of the hive so the kids can come help. We can all do this together. But it's fun to do this in a way to where you're not just having bees to have bees. We just talked about all those reasons. Then you can start function stacking things within this same zone. The house is there, our zone 0. This is about our zone 1 for us, pushing zone 2 in our system here. And we can have things like a medicinal and edible windbreak on either side. The deer get it, some of the animals get it. What's great about it in the future, if we ever do need to naturally treat the bees using acrylic acid, we can use the comfrey leaves themselves, put those in the smoker. Things that we learned from Michael Jordan, using things like rhubarb, comfrey leaves, using natural means, if that's something we want to have in our context. So it's fun to be able to put them all together where I can come out, I can sit, I can watch the bees in the morning, I can see what the plants are doing. It creates a little bit of a medicinal and food insurance policy when you can kind of stack all these things all in the same space. Otherwise, you would have bees, and you'd have bees and rows of bees with grass you have to manage. And as you can see, the grass isn't really high in this area, and that's because we run the goats right up and around the beehives, and also the sheep. We put poultry netting around these and around the crops here. And the sheep can come in and graze and maintain our grasses and clovers and things for us too, which helps not only them, it improves the visible aspects of the bee yard here, but it also keeps the grass away from the beehives. So we have a reduction in ants and maybe hive beetles and things like that, where we're keeping things just a little bit more managed. So it's fun to be able to stack all these things and have them work so well together. And on the back side of this bee yard here, we've got about 300 pines planted and some mulberry and elderberry and comfrey as more edible windbreaks, but with the Norway spruce eventually coming up behind here for constant windbreak in the year. So that's how we're kind of doing our bee yard right now, and so far it's working out really well. We just had our local inspector out, which we're mandated here in Ohio to have it inspected, and found no varroa mites, which is really good news. So we can go into the winter with healthy hives and see how they do. So I know I keep saying it, but it's bees themselves are fun, and planting edibles is fun. But when you marry the two together, not in a forced way, but in a way where they work together, there's a lot of satisfaction with that and watching that whole system kind of develop.
You know, these hives are smaller hives than I've traditionally seen.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what they are, where you learned about them, and where people could learn more about them?
Yeah, so these are 5-frame medium boxes. There's 5 frames on the inside, and on most of these, there's 5 frames on the inside, and then right now there's on this particular box there's probably about 10,000 bees or so. They're all gearing down, getting ready for winter. On some of them, we've added boxes on top, and that's just to help give them some more honey pantry. These are smaller boxes. Typically, you're going to have larger boxes. These boxes here, so these are 5-frame boxes. The size of the frames are mediums. A box like this is an 8-frame box with. There's nothing in this one, but we keep it very simple. We have a top cover. We have the box itself, and then we use a solid bottom board, and most of them we have sectioned off, so the only airflow we have is coming in through the front dial and the back, and we can control that, which has been really crucial this year. And how we made so many bees was kind of learning how and when to split them, and in what size boxes and types that they need. Typically, and we don't have anymore, the first year we ran bees, we bartered pork for some time of our local beekeeper Shane McClellan and all his equipment, and he was running 10-frame deeps, which is kind of more of a standard way. It worked well for him, but for what we were trying to do, it wasn't working real well for our goals, and so we switched to this little bit different type. This isn't like, I don't know that there's a specific thing that you would call this. There's lots of different, I think, folks that are running hives like this. I know Michael Jordan runs he's running smaller boxes now with smaller bees. Michael Bush is another one. Guys up towards like Vermont and some of the colder climates have found that running bees in smaller boxes is way healthier for the bees. If you think about, if you live in a winter in an old farmhouse, and it's a 2-story farmhouse, and you have 10 people in that house, if that second story isn't used all day long, it gets cold. And so usually in the old farmhouse, you would find ways to shut the doors, curtain it off, so all the hot, warm air stays in that lower story. The same thing happens with the bees. In this situation here, we have a number of bees that are in this box. They can keep this size box warm, no problem. They can go through the winter with that warmth, and they can still have all the moisture still leave, and this hive can still be ventilated. When we stack them this tall, there has to be twice as many bees to make a ball on the inside to keep this surface area warm. If you just went 8-frame or 10-frame hives, you have to have a lot of bees constantly. Where we find where it gets tricky is when you have X number of bees with X amount of frames of honey, it has to be balanced correctly, or you have bees that are getting too warm and they're breaking cluster and they're feeding. You want just enough bees where they stay dormant, and there's honey there if and when they need it. And what that does is it allows them to go through the entire winter, not depleting all their honey supplies, with the goal of keeping everybody warm and keeping it ventilated. So far, and we'll see how this year goes, we've had great success running them in small boxes. Now these look smaller. They probably don't look as impressive as big white boxes stacked to the ceiling. But if you think about it, if you look around here, all these trees, every tree where you're going to find a bee in nature, if you look at the cavity size of a bee tree, you're going to find it looks almost, these are those dimensions. So what we can do is we can just stack box after box after box. We can have, if we want 2 boxes of brood, 2 boxes of honey, or 3 boxes of honey, well, we can find ways to do that and keep the surface area the bees have to maintain and keep warm, all kind of in a unified shape, unified size. What's also really handy about this kind of a system is every box is the same size. So if we're going to add a brood box to it, it's this size. A honey super, it's this size. We don't have to have shallows or deeps or anything special for honey, nothing special for brood, nothing special to exclude queens. And that it saves us a little bit of time because we can just grab a box, we can put it on top, and it's just a way to simplify the system, and it seemingly also benefiting the health of the bees.
What's with the jars on top?
Okay, so these are jars of sugar syrup. In the sugar syrup right now is tea tree oil. Some folks don't believe in feeding their bees, some folks do. Long-term game, right now this is an input for our bees. We started off with 5 hives this year. The only way we got 5 hives to this many hives is to get in the carbohydrates. What the bees do is they feed on that sugar syrup. They don't turn that sugar syrup into honey. They're not storing this and making honey out of it. It's a carbohydrate. They sweat and make the wax off their exoskeleton, and then they go and they start peeling off that wax and they can make comb. The queen can't lay eggs in comb, and the worker bees can't bring in nectar to make honey without comb. So what this does is it encourages them to sweat the wax to make comb. They can make the comb as fast as they need to, and then they can decide, do they need to have brood, do they need to have drones, are they going to go ahead and start putting away nectar and honey. So this is not really a shortcut, but it's an input that encourages them to make wax way faster, and that's the only way that we have gone from 5 to this many hives, is using this. Now, we don't do any kind of chemical or synthetic treatments on the bees whatsoever. All we've done for their health this year is early on in the year we make up a mix that has spearmint and wintergreen and lemongrass essential oils in the sugar syrup, and that seems to be working really well. When you get towards the summer months, you have to cut back on the lemongrass oil because it entices yellow jackets and other feral bees to come in and rob the hives, because the lemongrass acts as the queen's pheromone. So it's called a brood builder is what it is, and it helps them brood build because they can, build brood because they can build the wax and they can keep everything going. And then this time of year, we're still feeding them out. They're hardly even, we added these jars before Oktoberfest, which has been, it's been 11 days now since we added these on here, and they still aren't, they're not touching it. It's here if they want it, if they need it. They're out foraging for the rest of their needs here. It's supplemental at best right now. There's tea tree oil in it just to help with any kind of gut digestion, to help prevent nosema or any kind of dietary issues they might have going into the winter time. So very minimalistic as far as what we're doing. Of course, we could not do any of this and throw them in boxes. But if you really think about it, if you take any kind of a bee from a tree and put it in a box, you've already put it into a man-managed system. You can let them go, you can let them do their own thing. When they outgrow that box and they leave, and then you're left with a box and hardly any bees, and they're back at square one. So if you're going to put bees in a box, you have to kind of decide, why am I doing this? Why do I have bees? What are my goals? And then that dictates what you do moving forward. If all I was going to do was make honey on those 5 hives, I wouldn't have fed them at all. I would have left them in 5 boxes. I would have stacked them up. They would have been 3 or 4 high, and that would have been great. That would have met my goals. But I understood why I was doing this and what my goals were. This year's goals were to make bees to go into the winter with numbers. So to do that, we added some sugar syrup to get them going. And moving forward next year, what we're going to do is we're going to have some of these hives are going to be just for honey production, and we won't feed them at all. And then the hives that we're continuing to grow numbers, we'll still feed them sugar, at least make it available to them to increase our numbers, so we can keep meeting our goals of making bees, meet our goals of having honey. And then also the big challenge has been of late in most areas of the country is keeping bees alive through the winter and coming out of the spring. So this is an insurance policy of trying to go into the winter with as many bees that we can, so we can come out in the spring with as many bees that we can, so we can keep growing our system at a scale that we're comfortable with.